Hello everyone, please tell me. Which city are you listening from? What time is it there? It started with the light. I had been sitting in my apartment, looking out at the city as usual, watching the world go by below me. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the streets, but there was something strange about it that day. The sky began to shift, at first slowly, then more rapidly. The clouds rolled in, thick and heavy, darkening the horizon in an unnatural way. It wasn't a typical storm, no flashes of lightning or thunder to signal its arrival. Just a slow, creeping darkness that seemed to swallow the light from the sky. I remember feeling the change before I saw it. There was a sudden drop in the temperature, as if the air had become denser, heavier. My skin prickled with the odd sensation of being watched, a sense of unease that grew steadily stronger as the sky continued to darken. I glanced at my phone to check the time, but the screen was blank. No signal, nothing. I tried the lights, next flicked the switch, but they didn't come on. That's when I looked out the window again. The sky had turned pitch black, but below, the city remained bathed in light. Every building, every street, every tree, every person still perfectly visible, as if it were the brightest midday. There was no transition, no gradual darkening of the surroundings. It was as though the sun had simply stopped existing, but everything underneath it had been frozen in the same bright clarity. I stood there, staring, my mind racing. This wasn't natural. There was no explanation for it. I could see the people on the sidewalks, walking as if nothing had changed, their faces lit up by the strange, unshifting daylight that wasn't coming from any visible source. The lights on the buildings, the street lamps, they flickered for a moment, then stayed steady, as though powered by something unseen. There were no shadows, no depth to anything, just a stark, flat world of light that felt both familiar and completely wrong. I stepped away from the window, my heart beating a little faster now. The temperature had dropped even further, and the air felt thick with the sensation that something was about to happen, something I couldn't yet understand. I moved toward the door, my hand shaking slightly as I reached for the handle. The hallway outside was quiet, eerily so, despite the strange daylight spilling in through the windows. I paused for a moment, listening for any sound, but there was nothing, no footsteps, no cars outside, not even the usual hum of the city. I opened the door, stepped out into the hallway, and froze. The walls were dark, almost black, and the silence pressed in around me. I wasn't sure what I expected, but it certainly wasn't this. The hallway seemed endless now, stretching out before me in a way that didn't feel normal. The air was thick with something unnameable, something that made my skin crawl as I took a step forward. And that's when I heard it. A faint sound, distant at first, like a whisper carried by the wind. I stopped, straining to hear it more clearly, but it was gone as quickly as it came. I could feel the weight of the silence closing in, pressing against my ears. The unsettling feeling that had started in the apartment now enveloped me completely. I walked down the hall, my footsteps muffled against the cold, polished floor. The door to the stairwell was just ahead, and as I reached for the handle, I glanced out the window. The world below had changed. The city, still brightly illuminated, now looked off. The people walking on the streets, their faces frozen in that strange daylight, no longer seemed like people at all. Their movements were too fluid, too synchronized, like marionettes on invisible strings. And there was something wrong with their faces too still. Too perfect, as if they were masks, as though they weren't alive at all. I couldn't breathe. I took a step back from the window, heart hammering, and stumbled back into the hallway. The air seemed to close in on me, the shadows of the building growing longer, thicker, though the daylight never shifted. I turned the handle of the stairwell door, my mind racing. I had to get outside, I had to leave. But the instant I stepped into the stairwell, I felt a presence. It wasn't just the empty building anymore. It was something more. The air was heavier here, more oppressive, as if the walls themselves were closing in. Then I heard it again, the whisper. Louder this time, clearer, like a voice, though I couldn't understand the words. The sound was coming from all directions at once, filling the space around me, growing stronger as I descended the stairs. I pressed my hand against the wall, my breath shallow as I tried to steady myself. My pulse was racing in my ears, and the chill that had started in my apartment now felt like it had seeped into my very bones. I needed to get out. The sound in the stairwell was growing louder, the whispers now indistinct, almost like a chant, but I couldn't make out the words. I reached the bottom of the stairs, the door leading outside just in front of me. The tension was unbearable now, the whispers echoing in my head. I opened the door and stepped out into the street. The city was still there, illuminated in that strange, unyielding daylight. The buildings stretched into the sky, but everything was flat, every corner sharp, every shadow non-existent. The people on the streets know things. They moved in perfect harmony, too perfect, too synchronized to be real. And yet, I was standing in the middle of it, trapped in this distorted world of light, unable to escape. I stumbled back, my breath quickening, as I realized something. I had never truly left. The city was still there, yes, but it wasn't the same. The darkness had consumed everything, and yet the daylight persisted, as if the world itself had been rewritten. I looked around, and I understood. This wasn't just a shift in the sky. This wasn't just a strange phenomenon. This was a world without time, without change. A world where the light would never fade. It was one of those mornings when the fog clung to everything, thick and heavy, so dense that it felt like the world was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I woke up early, as I often did, to the sound of the rain, only this time it was quieter. The usual patter against the window was muffled, distant, almost as if the rain itself didn't want to disturb the eerie silence outside. The air felt damp, cold enough to make you want to pull the covers back over your head, but the curiosity that had been gnawing at me for weeks was too strong to ignore. The fog had rolled in the night before, and with it, the strange, unsettling feeling I couldn't shake. It wasn't unusual for fog to settle in this part of town, but this felt different, thicker, heavier, like the world was smothered under a weight it couldn't lift. As I stood by the window, watching the gray shadows blur the outlines of the trees and houses across the street, a chill ran down my spine. The street, usually so full of life, seemed deserted, as if the fog had swallowed it whole. I stepped outside, pulling my jacket tighter around me. The cold air bit at my face, and the world seemed to shrink with each step I took. The fog was so thick that I could barely see beyond the end of my driveway. I felt the weight of the silence pressing in, every footstep amplified, every breath visible in the damp morning air. I walked down the street, my boots making a soft, muffled sound against the wet pavement. The fog twisted and curled around the streetlights, creating faint halos of yellow light that seemed to flicker in and out, like they were trying to break free from the mist. The houses around me stood like sentinels, their shapes blurred, their windows dark and empty. There was no one else on the street, no cars, no people, just me and the silence. That's when I saw her. At first, she was just a figure, barely visible through the fog, her shape distorted by the mist. She was walking slowly, almost aimlessly, her steps deliberate but unhurried. She was dressed in a long coat, its edges blending into the fog, her face obscured by the thick veil of white that surrounded her. But what struck me the most wasn't her appearance, it was the way she moved. The way she seemed to glide through the fog, like she wasn't truly part of it. Like the mist bent around her, making space for her presence. I stopped walking, instinctively, watching her as she drew closer. There was something about her that felt wrong. She wasn't moving like a normal person. There was no hesitation in her steps, no shift in her posture as she navigated the dense fog. It was as if the fog didn't touch her at all. It parted around her, as if she was a part of it, and the more I watched, the more unnerving it became. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Something wasn't right. She continued to walk, her pace steady, as if she were heading somewhere specific. But there was no destination that I could see, not in the fog, not in the emptiness of the street. I couldn't make out her face, but something about the way she carried herself, her movements so calm, so unbothered by the strange world around her, set off a deep unease within me. I felt drawn to her, pulled forward by a force I couldn't explain. My legs moved before my mind could fully process it, and I began to walk after her, my feet crunching against the wet ground. As I got closer, I noticed something else, something that made my heart skip a beat. Her footprints didn't lead anywhere. The street was wet, covered in a thin sheen of rain that had pooled in places. Yet where her feet should have left an imprint on the ground, there was nothing. No wet marks, no smudge of a shoe against the pavement. Just a clean, untouched surface. It was as if the ground beneath her was refusing to accept that she was there. I stopped in my tracks, my breath catching in my throat. How was that possible? No one walks in the fog without leaving a trace. Yet there she was, gliding effortlessly forward, leaving nothing behind but the sound of her footsteps, soft and steady, like a whisper lost in the mist. I watched her for a few more seconds, my mind racing.
What was she?
Who was she? I should have turned around and gone back, should have just walked away from whatever this was. But something deep inside me kept me moving forward. I caught up with her just as she reached the corner of the street. I was close enough now to see the vague outline of her face, but it was still hidden beneath the fog. I could make out the shape of her eyes, dark and hollow, like they were staring through me, not at me. There was no emotion in them, no recognition, just a deep emptiness that felt like it had been carved out by years of solitude. And yet, despite the unsettling feeling that washed over me, she didn't stop. She didn't even acknowledge my presence. I called out to her, my voice barely rising above the stillness of the fog. "Hey," I said, but my words felt like they were swallowed up by the mist before they could reach her. She didn't flinch, didn't slow down. She just kept walking, one foot in front of the other, her footsteps measured and slow. As I stood there, watching her move farther down the street, I felt the fog closing in around me. The world seemed to get even quieter, as if everything was being pulled away from me, like the mist was swallowing up my very thoughts. I couldn't understand it. She was walking, yes, but where was she going? Why was she walking without leaving a trace? I took a step forward, compelled by something I couldn't explain, and then I froze. Her footprints, there were none. She had walked right through the wet pavement, and there was no sign, no trace that she had been there. Not a single mark left on the ground. The street, now untouched, seemed as if no one had passed through it at all. The fog thickened, swirling around her figure until it obscured her entirely. She was gone, vanished without a sound, leaving behind nothing but the emptiness of the street and the pressing silence. I stood there for a long time, staring at the place where she had been. The fog refused to let go, lingering in the air, and the quiet stretched on, almost suffocating in its weight. The chill in the air deepened, and I could feel my heartbeat thudding in my chest. A stark contrast to the stillness of the world around me. I turned and walked back toward my house, my mind spinning, trying to make sense of what had just happened. I glanced over my shoulder once, just to make sure I wasn't imagining it all. But there was nothing. The street was empty again. Just the fog, the damp, the silence. And then I realized her footprints never led anywhere because she never was here. It was a quiet evening, one of those peaceful nights that almost made you forget the world outside, as if time had slowed down just for you. I was sitting on my couch, a book in hand, the soft hum of the city barely filtering through the windows. The rain was tapping lightly against the glass, but it was the kind of rain that was more of a background sound than anything else, almost comforting. I had been feeling off lately, anxious, restless, as if something was lurking just beyond my awareness. I couldn't shake it, no matter how many nights I spent curled up on that couch, trying to immerse myself in a good story. And then, the phone rang. It was strange because I hadn't been expecting any calls. I wasn't really close to anyone in the city. My circle was small, my social interactions even smaller. I glanced at the screen. The number was unfamiliar, and for a moment, I hesitated. I thought about letting it go to voicemail, but something curiosity maybe nudged me to answer. I swiped the screen and pressed the phone to my ear. "Hello," I said, my voice quiet, almost hesitant, unsure of why I'd picked up in the first place. The line was silent for a beat, and I wondered if it was a wrong number. But then, the voice on the other end spoke. It was mine. I froze. The voice was unmistakable, the tone, the pitch, everything was exactly the same, as if I were listening to myself speak. I would have recognized it anywhere. But it wasn't me who had spoken. not in any way I could explain. It was my voice, but it wasn't me. "Hello," the voice said again. The words sounded muffled, almost like they were being spoken from far away, or through some kind of distortion. But it was definitely me. There was no mistaking it. "Can you hear me?" I swallowed hard, my throat suddenly dry. "Who is this?" I asked, the words slipping out more quickly than I intended, panic creeping into my chest. But the response wasn't what I expected. The voice on the other end didn't sound confused or like it was trying to explain. Instead, it was calm, too calm. "You've been avoiding it," it said. "The question? The thing you've been afraid to face." It paused, and I could hear a faint, almost imperceptible rustle, like static or a distant whisper, before continuing. "You know what it is." I felt the blood drain from my face, my hand tightening around the phone. I was listening intently, but at the same time, my mind was desperately trying to make sense of it. How could this be happening? Who was doing this? I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came. My mind raced, flashes of everything that had been weighing on me recently, all the vague fears and unsettling thoughts that had crept into my consciousness, and now, this. The voice was mine, but the words, it was as if it was taunting me. "You've never asked yourself the right question," the voice continued. "The one that matters." It sighed softly, like it was disappointed. "But you will, eventually, when you're ready." I stood up, the room suddenly feeling too small, too close. My heart was pounding now, each beat sounding louder in my ears. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice trembling. "What do you want?" There was another pause, a long one this time. I could hear my own breathing over the line, the seconds stretching on unnaturally. Finally, the voice spoke again, slow and deliberate. "You've been here before, haven't you?" The voice said, almost like it was reminiscing. "You know this place. You know what I mean?" My mind went blank for a moment, a cold chill sweeping through me. The question it asked hit me like a punch to the stomach. Asterisk, "You've been here before." What did that mean? Where was here? And then it hit me. The place I had been avoiding, the memories I'd been burying deep, the moments from my past that I never wanted to face again. It wasn't just the voice, it was everything. It was reminding me of everything I had pushed aside for years. A rush of memories flooded my mind, unbidden and overwhelming. I could see fragments of my past, things I had buried, ignored. Faces, places, and moments, none of them making sense, none of them fitting together. But the connection was there, lurking beneath the surface, just out of sight. And the voice seemed to know all of it. I swallowed hard, fighting to steady my breathing, my pulse racing. I could feel the walls of the apartment closing in on me. The room had become suffocating, the silence between each of the voice's words unbearable. "Who are you?" I asked again, this time with more force, desperate for answers. "Tell me who you are." The voice on the other end was silent for a moment, and for a split second, I thought it might hang up. But then, it spoke, and the words it said sent a cold shiver down my spine. "Look behind you," it said. I froze. My heart skipped a beat. My eyes darted to the doorway leading into the small hallway of my apartment. There was no sound, Nothing out of the ordinary, but my voice seemed so certain, so calm. It was almost as if it expected me to do it, as if it knew exactly what would happen. I turned slowly, my legs like lead. The hallway behind me was dark, the dim light from the living room barely reaching it. The air felt heavier now, thick with an unseen weight, and for the first time, I felt something I hadn't expected: dread. The kind of cold, suffocating fear that gnaws at you. The kind that makes every shadow feel like it's hiding something. Nothing. There was nothing in the hallway. Just the faint outline of the door to my bedroom, the same as always. The apartment was empty. I breathed a sigh of relief, a nervous laugh escaping me as I turned back toward the phone. But before I could speak, the voice came again. Not there, not yet. It was so calm, so matter-of-fact, that I could barely process the words. Not there, not yet. The message was clear. It was waiting. And it knew something I didn't. Before I could ask anything more, the phone line went silent. The call ended, the sudden silence ringing in my ears. I stared at the screen, my thumb frozen over the red button. The call had ended, but the questions, the unease, those stayed. I don't know how long I stood there, holding the phone, my breath shallow in the thick air. The room was too quiet now, every noise amplifying in my mind. I should have been relieved. It was over. The call had ended, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed, something that I couldn't undo. And then, the ringing started again. This time, I didn't even look at the number. I answered before I could think, but when I spoke, the voice on the other end was mine again. And it said, simply, "I told you to look." I didn't need to turn around this time, I already knew. The door to the hallway was wide open. It started on an evening like any other, quiet and still, with the soft hum of the world outside my apartment mingling with the low rumble of the rain. The sky was heavy, casting a muted light through my curtains as I sat on the couch, trying to shake off the fatigue from a long day. The air was thick with the smell of wet concrete, the kind that only comes with a fresh downpour, and I could hear the occasional car passing by, its tires hissing on the slick roads. I had moved into this place a few months ago. It wasn't anything fancy, just a small, one-bedroom unit on the third floor of an old building. The kind of place that didn't have much character, but also didn't need any. It was quiet, private, and for the most part, exactly what I needed. I wasn't looking for anything grand, just somewhere to retreat after work. The neighbors were mostly quiet, and the building itself had that dated, creaky charm that made you feel like you were living inside an old story. But there was something strange about the door. It wasn't anything I could put my finger on at first. Just an odd feeling whenever I passed by it. It was the last door at the end of the hallway, tucked away in a corner where the light didn't quite reach. The door itself was a dark, weathered wood, a little scratched at the edges, like it had seen better days. It was almost always slightly ajar, just a sliver, as if it didn't quite close properly, like someone had forgotten to shut it all the way. At first, I thought nothing of it. I was too preoccupied with settling into the new place, unpacking boxes, getting used to the sounds of the building settling at night. But over time, something about that door began to bother me. I'd walk past it on my way to my apartment, and sometimes, in the corner of my eye, I'd swear I saw movement, a shadow flicking just out of sight. But when I'd stop and look, the hallway would be empty, save for the soft hum of the building. No one ever came out of that door, no one ever went in. Yet, it was always slightly open, always inviting curiosity, though I could never quite bring myself to take a closer look. Then, it happened. One night, after dinner, I was sitting on the couch, reading a book, when I heard it. The faintest sound, like whispering. At first, I thought I had imagined it, that it was just the wind outside or the pipes groaning under the weight of the rain. But then it came again, clearer this time. A voice, low and muffled, like it was coming from the other side of the door. I sat up straight, listening. There was no mistaking it now. The voices were soft, almost a murmur, and they seemed to move, as if they were walking along the hallway. The more I listened, the more distinct they became. I couldn't make out the words, but there was an unmistakable quality to them, a sense of urgency, like they were discussing something important, something I wasn't supposed to hear. I held my breath, straining to listen. The voices faded in and out, now closer, now farther, until they seemed to be right behind the door itself, just beyond the wood, just beyond my reach. A shiver ran down my spine. I stood up, my heart pounding in my chest, and walked to the door. The hallway was still, the lights flickering softly above me as I hesitated, my hand just inches from the handle. The voices were quiet now, almost gone, but I could still hear the faintest echo, like the remnants of a conversation that had just ended. I don't know why I did it. I had no reason to, no need to. But in that moment, I wanted to know. I needed to know who was behind that door, what they were saying, why it had been left open for so long, and why I hadn't heard these voices until now. I took a deep breath, turned the handle, and pushed the door open. What greeted me on the other side wasn't anything I had expected. It was darkness. The hallway beyond the door was empty, just as it had always been. No movement, no shadows flickering across the walls. Just darkness. Deep, consuming darkness that seemed to stretch on forever, as if the hallway itself had no end. The air felt thick, heavy, like something was pressing against me, pushing me back. I took a step forward, the floorboards creaking under my feet, and as I moved into the room, I realized something. The voices were gone, completely gone. The silence was deafening now, the kind that presses in on you, fills your ears, and makes your head spin. I stood there, my hand still gripping the doorframe, my mind racing to make sense of it all. There had been voices. I had heard them, clear as day. They weren't just a figment of my imagination. And yet, standing here now, in this room that shouldn't have even existed there, was nothing. Just empty, suffocating darkness. I slowly stepped back, closing the door behind me, the old wood creaking under my touch. The moment the door clicked shut, the sound of the rain outside seemed to come rushing back, as if it had been waiting for the silence to fill the space. I stood there for a long time, staring at the door. My heart was still racing, my mind unable to let go of the memory of those voices. I didn't sleep that night, not really. I stayed on the couch, my eyes fixed on the door, waiting for anything to happen. But the night passed quietly, as it always did, and eventually, I drifted off into an uneasy sleep. The next morning, when I woke up, I went straight to the door. I didn't know why, but I had to check again. I opened it, but this time there was no darkness, no silence. Just the same old hallway, the same dim light flickering above, and the faint echo of my own footsteps as I walked past. The door, once again, was slightly ajar, like it always had been. There was no sign of what I had heard, no indication that anything had ever been out of place. I could have let it go, convinced myself that it had all been some kind of odd dream, a trick of my tired mind. But something inside me couldn't. I couldn't forget the voices. I couldn't forget the feeling that something had been there, just out of sight, waiting for me to find it. And I still don't know what it was. The voices, the darkness, the sense that something was watching me, listening. I don't know if it's a part of the building, a part of this place I don't understand, or if it's something else altogether, something far older, far deeper than I could ever imagine. All I know is that, to this day, that door is always open a little. And every time I walk past it, I hear it. Just the faintest sound, like a whisper on the edge of my consciousness. The kind of sound you can never quite place, but you know it's there. And sometimes, when the night is still, I'll hear those voices again. Faint, distant, and just beyond my reach. Always just out of sight. Always just beyond the door. I don't open it anymore. I don't think I ever will. I remember the evening like it was yesterday, even though it's been years now. It was one of those damp, almost oppressive evenings, where the rain didn't just fall, it seemed to press down on everything. The clouds were heavy, hanging low in the sky, the kind that made the world feel small and distant, like a suffocating blanket. I was walking home, a little tired from the long day. My thoughts scattered as the rhythm of my footsteps blended with the constant drumming of rain against the pavement. The street was quiet, empty except for the occasional rustle of wind pushing the trees, their branches bending like the hands of a tired old man. The street I lived on was like most streets in the area, narrow and lined with old houses that had seen better days. Some of the buildings had peeling paint, others were slightly askew, leaning as though they were trying to keep each other upright. It was a neighborhood that had its charm if you looked at it just right, but it also had something off about it. Something I couldn't put my finger on for the longest time. I walked past the usual landmarks, the old bakery with its dim, yellow lights spilling onto the sidewalk, the newsstand that always smelled faintly of stale paper and tobacco, the park bench that seemed to always be occupied by someone, just a body, hunched in a coat, silent and still. Everything was just as it should have been, except for one thing: the building. It wasn't there anymore. Now, let me explain. This wasn't just some small change I could chalk up to my tired mind playing tricks on me. No, this was different. This was something that I knew, deep down, was real. The building had been there for as long as I could remember. It was a rundown apartment block, faded brick and dark windows, tall and imposing, standing like an old sentinel at the end of the street. I would pass it every day on my way home. It always had a certain presence about it, It was never lively, there were never any lights on, no signs of life. But there it was, always there, casting its shadow over the street. And yet, on that particular evening, as I walked down the familiar path, I could feel it. The absence, the space where it used to be. I paused for a moment, looking around. The air felt heavier now, as if something was shifting around me. I looked to my left, and instead of the gray, crumbling facade I expected, there was only space, empty pavement. The outline of where the building used to stand was still there, faintly imprinted on the street, like a ghost of something long gone. I stood frozen for a moment, trying to make sense of it. Had I missed it? Maybe it had been torn down. Maybe it had always been gone, and I just hadn't noticed until now. But no, that wasn't it. I had passed by that building every day for years. I would have noticed if it had been gone. I would have remembered if there had been construction. But there had been nothing. It was just gone, just like that. I took a few more steps, my feet feeling heavy, the rain falling harder now, the droplets hammering the pavement in a constant, relentless rhythm. The silence around me seemed deeper somehow. It felt like the rain was pushing against me, like the world itself was holding its breath. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching, that the absence of the building was more than just a missing structure. Something wasn't right. That's when I saw her. At first, it was just a glimpse. I had only noticed her out of the corner of my eye, someone standing in a window, staring out at me from the floor of the building that no longer existed. Her figure was faint at first, almost a blur, her face too shadowed to make out. But her presence, that was undeniable. She stood there, just looking. Her gaze, fixed and intense, seemed to pull me in, making me forget the rain, the cold, the eerie emptiness of the street. It was as if time had slowed, and in that moment there was only her and me. I stood there, frozen again, a chill running through me that wasn't from the rain. It was as if the very air around me had shifted, becoming heavier, thicker with something I couldn't name. My feet felt stuck, rooted to the ground, unable to move. The figure in the window remained motionless, her eyes unblinking, staring directly at me. I wanted to turn away, to look at something else, anything else, but I couldn't. My eyes were fixed, drawn to her in a way that made my heart beat faster, as if something inside me knew that I shouldn't be looking. But still, I couldn't stop. Then, without any warning, the figure raised her hand, slowly. Not in a wave, not in a gesture that you would expect from a stranger. No, this was different. She lifted her hand, and with it, she pointed directly at me. It wasn't a casual motion, like someone making a passing gesture. It was deliberate. The way she pointed felt almost accusing, as though she was silently asking, "Why are you still here?" I took a deep breath, and that's when I realized something. The rain had stopped. The sound had faded away, leaving only an eerie, quiet stillness in its place. I looked around again. The street was still empty, the same as it always had been, but now it felt wrong, like the world had paused, frozen in time, waiting for something to happen. I could feel a knot of unease tightening in my chest as I tried to move. My legs felt heavy, like they were caught in some kind of invisible web, and it took everything I had to break my gaze from the window. I turned and began walking faster, my heart racing in my chest. But even as I moved, I couldn't shake the feeling that she was still watching me, still there in that empty building that shouldn't even exist anymore. I didn't look back. I couldn't. When I reached my apartment, I locked the door behind me and sat down, trying to calm my breathing, trying to make sense of it all. The rain had started again, tapping gently against my window as I sat there, staring into the dim light of the room. My hands trembled slightly as I took off my shoes, trying to shake the lingering sense of being watched, of something being wrong. I thought I was safe, thought that the feeling of dread would finally pass, but it didn't. In the back of my mind, a question kept looping over and over. Who was she? Why was she pointing at me? I tried to sleep that night, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face faint, blurred, her eyes locked on mine, unblinking, unyielding. The next morning, I woke to an unusual silence. The rain had stopped, and the streets outside looked different. The usual sound of life, the soft hum of the city, was missing. I stood up, walked to the window, and looked out. And there it was, the building. It had returned. The same old, crumbling structure, standing tall and unmoving, as though it had never been gone. There were no signs of construction, no evidence of anything having happened. It was just back. But I knew what I saw the night before. I knew what I felt. And I knew, deep down, that the woman in the window was still watching. The thing is, I never saw her again. Not in the window, not anywhere. But sometimes, when I pass by that building, I feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. And I can't help but wonder, what if it's not just the building that's gone? What if there's something else, something hidden in the shadows, still waiting to be seen, something that doesn't belong, something that shouldn't be there at all? I still walk past that spot every day, but now, I keep my eyes straight ahead, never looking up. Because I know, deep down, that sometimes, the most terrifying thing is what you don't see, and what you don't understand. The building is there, but the question remains what's inside it now? It was a quiet afternoon when I found it, tucked between the pages of an old book I had picked up from a dusty shelf at the second-hand store. The book, its leather cover cracked with age, had been on my reading list for a while, but I had never gotten around to it. I had bought it on a whim that day, something about it feeling like it would be a welcome distraction from the usual routine. I opened the book carefully, flipping through the brittle pages until something caught my eye. A postcard. It was old, the edges worn and yellowed with time. I pulled it out slowly, wondering who had left it there. It had no envelope, no notes, just the image of a city street, lined with old buildings, a fountain in the center, and trees whose leaves were just beginning to turn yellow with the change of seasons. The postcard looked like one of those vintage tourist cards, the kind people used to send to family or friends from faraway places. What caught my attention, though, wasn't the scene itself. It was the people, or, rather, the lack of them. The postcard was filled with details. The stone pavement, the old lampposts casting long shadows, the buildings standing tall and proud, and in the distance, the silhouette of a park bench under a tree. But there was no one in the picture. No figures strolling along the street, no passerby, no one sitting on the park bench. The scene was eerily still, like a photograph taken at the perfect moment just before everyone disappeared. I turned the postcard over, half expecting to see a message or perhaps an old stamp, but the back was blank, nothing but the faded markings of time. Just the image of that street. I stared at it for a long time, an odd sense of familiarity creeping over me. Something about the place felt so familiar. The more I looked at it, the more I was certain that I had seen this exact street before. In a dream, or maybe in a memory I couldn't quite grasp. The trees, the fountain, the old lampposts, it was as if I had walked down this very street 100 times. But I knew I hadn't. I had never been to this city, never visited any place like it. And yet, as I sat there, holding the postcard in my hands, I couldn't shake the feeling that I should know it. That I had once been there, somehow. I turned the postcard over again, running my fingers over the smooth, faded surface of the card. That's when I saw it. In the corner of the postcard, partially obscured by the border, was a small figure. A silhouette, barely visible, but unmistakably there. At first I thought it was a trick of the light, a smudge on the card. But when I looked closer, I realized what I was seeing. It was me. A figure, just barely visible, standing near the fountain, facing away from the camera. The posture was familiar, the shape of the figure unmistakably mine, though it was only a shadow, a fleeting reflection of a person in the scene. I could barely make out the details of the figure, but there I was, standing in that place I had never been. I froze, staring at the postcard, my heart pounding in my chest. The figure in the scene wore the same coat I had been wearing that day, the same bag slung over my shoulder, the same stance I had when I'd taken the postcard out of the book. It didn't make sense. How could it be me? How could I be in a postcard that I had never seen before, in a place I had never been? I felt the room around me grow colder, the familiar surroundings of my apartment now seeming strange and distant. I turned the postcard over again, as if the back might hold some kind of explanation. But it was still blank. There was no message, no clue as to who had sent it, no indication of when or where it was from. The more I looked at it, the more I felt the weight of the mystery press in on me. I turned it over one last time, trying to make sense of the strange, blurry image. And as I did, I noticed something else, something that hadn't been there before. A tiny detail, hidden just beneath the corner of the fountain. The shadow of my figure, so faint at first, now had a distinct feature that I hadn't noticed earlier. My face, though it was still a shadow, the contours of my features, the shape of my expression, were visible. And what struck me the most was the look in my eyes, faint, but undeniably clear. I was looking directly at the camera, at the person who had taken the photograph, at me. A wave of dizziness washed over me, and I dropped the postcard. It fluttered to the floor, landing face up. I knelt to pick it up, my hands trembling, and as I did, I noticed something else in the background. Far in the distance, through the trees, near the edge of the street, there. The city had been particularly busy that day, a blur of crowded streets and endless noise. It was the kind of day where time slips away without you noticing. The minutes stretching into hours, the minutes becoming seconds. By the time evening arrived, the world felt heavier, weighed down by the exhaustion of too much activity. I was ready to go home, to retreat into the quiet comfort of my apartment. But I had one more stop to make, just one more errand to run before I could finally rest. I boarded the subway as usual, the train arriving with its familiar screech of metal on metal, the doors sliding open with a hiss. The car was packed, as it always was during rush hour. People were standing shoulder to shoulder, their faces buried in their phones, lost in their own thoughts. The overhead lights flickered for a moment as I found a spot to stand near the door, my hand gripping the pole as the train lurched forward. I didn't pay much attention to the stops at first. One had taken this route 100 times, each stop a blur in my routine, the stations growing increasingly familiar and predictable. But as the train rumbled on, I noticed something strange. The next station didn't sound like the one I was expecting. The announcement over the speaker was quiet, almost drowned out by the noise of the train itself, but when I strained to hear it, the name of the station caught me off guard. Enderley. I didn't recognize it. I had been riding this subway for years, had passed through every station on this line, but I had never heard of it before. I glanced around the car, looking for any sign that others had noticed, but no one seemed to react. Everyone was still glued to their phones, their faces vacant, as if this was just another routine stop. The train slowed, the familiar screech of the brakes filling the space, and then the doors opened with a soft whoosh. I took a cautious step forward, not quite sure what had drawn me to the door, but before I knew it, I found myself stepping off the train and onto the platform. The station was dimly lit, the overhead lights buzzing faintly, and the walls were covered in tiles that had long since started to peel. It didn't look like the clean, modern stations I was used to. This one felt older, more worn, as though it hadn't seen maintenance in decades. The platform was nearly empty, with only a few scattered people standing near the edge, but even they didn't seem to acknowledge my presence. I hesitated for a moment, unsure whether I should stay or get back on the train. But something about the place tugged at me, a strange, magnetic pull that made me feel like I was supposed to be there. It was as if the station was calling me in a way that made no sense, as though I had been here before, or perhaps I was always meant to come here. I took a step further into the station, my shoes echoing on the worn tiles. The walls seemed to stretch endlessly in both directions, a corridor that led somewhere I couldn't see. The sound of distant trains echoed through the tunnels, but everything felt muffled, distant, like I was in a place that existed outside of time. There were no advertisements on the walls, no signs indicating which direction to go. It was just blank. A strange feeling crept over me, then a sense of familiarity, of being in a place I should know, but couldn't quite place. As I looked around, I noticed the other people on the platform. They were standing completely still, facing forward, not talking, not moving, as if they were waiting for something, for someone. I began to walk down the platform, drawn forward by a sense of urgency I couldn't explain. My footsteps sounded unnaturally loud in the quiet station, echoing off the walls as I walked past the motionless figures. Their faces were all blank, expressions vacant, but there was something about their eyes that unsettled me. They were watching, but not watching. As if they were expecting me, waiting for me to come closer, to step into the space they occupied. I reached the end of the platform, where a set of old, rusted stairs led upward. The walls around me were cracked, the tiles yellowed with age, and a faint smell of something musty hung in the air. But I didn't stop. The pull was stronger now, stronger than ever, and I knew, without a doubt, that I had to climb those stairs. I reached the top, the creaking of the old steps beneath me as I ascended. The air up here was cooler, less stifling, and as I emerged onto the street level, I found myself standing in an unfamiliar part of the city. The streets were quiet, eerily so, with no cars passing, no people walking. The buildings around me were old, too, their facades weathered and faded, as if they had been here for far longer than I had ever realized. The streetlights cast long shadows on the cracked pavement, and everything felt disconnected, as if this part of the city wasn't quite part of the world I knew. It felt like a forgotten corner of time, a place suspended between the present and the past. I looked around, trying to make sense of where I was. But the more I looked, the more I realized that the city around me was changing with each passing second. The familiar landmarks, the cafes I passed every day, the shops I knew by heart weren't here anymore. In their place were buildings I didn't recognize, streets that had never been on any map, and a quiet that felt too deep, too heavy. I began to walk, unsure of where I was going, but something inside me told me to keep moving forward. The streets twisted and turned, always leading me deeper into this unfamiliar place, yet it felt like I was being guided. I turned a corner and found myself standing in front of an old church, its spire stretching high into the sky. It was the only building that felt like it belonged in this world, standing strong amidst the strange landscape around it. And there, standing at the entrance, was a figure. It was her. The same woman I had seen standing on the subway platform, staring ahead with that same knowing look. She was waiting for me, standing in the shadow of the church, her eyes locking with mine as I approached. She didn't speak, didn't move, but there was a sense of recognition in her gaze, as if she had been waiting for me for far longer than I had realized. I reached out, almost instinctively, and when my fingers brushed against the stone of the church, a flood of memories rushed over me. I remembered this place, this city, this station. I had been here before, in another time, another life. It was a place that was always waiting for me, a place that was both familiar and impossible. And just as I thought I had made sense of it, I felt a shift, like the world had tilted just slightly, like the ground had moved beneath my feet. I blinked. The woman was gone. The church was gone. The street was gone. I was back on the subway platform. The lights flickered above me, the train doors opening, the city as loud and chaotic as ever. But I knew, in that moment, that the station, the street, the world I had just left it, had all been real, and it was waiting for me to return. The sun was setting when I first noticed her. I had been wandering through the city for hours, lost in my own thoughts, the streets blurring into a haze of familiarity and repetition. The city was alive, as it always was, people rushing by. The hum of distant traffic, the flickering neon signs that painted the night in vibrant colors. It felt like any other evening, but something felt off. It was the kind of feeling that presses against your chest, like something is just out of place, but you can't quite put your finger on it. I turned a corner, thinking I was heading toward the park, when I saw her standing at the edge of the sidewalk. She was looking down at a small piece of paper in her hands, her face partially obscured by the long, dark hair that fell over her shoulders. She didn't seem to notice me at first, her focus entirely on the paper. I was about to walk past her, lost in my own thoughts again, but then she looked up. Her eyes met mine, and for a moment I thought I saw a flicker of recognition. I paused, unsure why, but I couldn't help myself. There was something about the way she looked at me, something familiar, like I was supposed to know her, but I couldn't place her. She smiled softly, the kind of smile that felt both welcoming and distant at the same time. "Excuse me," she said, her voice quiet but clear. "Do you know where Westbrook Avenue is?" I blinked, caught off guard. Westbrook Avenue. I didn't recognize the name. I lived in the city, had walked these streets countless times, and yet I had never heard of Westbrook Avenue. "I'm sorry, I don't think I know that street," I replied, my voice uncertain. Her smile didn't fade, but there was a sadness in her eyes that lingered for just a moment before she nodded. She seemed unbothered, as if she had expected this answer. "It's right here," she said, pointing to the street ahead of us. Her finger extended toward the alley that ran alongside a row of old, crumbling buildings. I glanced at the alley, trying to make sense of it. The buildings were old, their facades cracked and covered with faded graffiti. The street ahead was narrow, dimly lit by the flickering. It didn't look like any part of the city I knew. It seemed forgotten, as though it had slipped through the cracks, hidden from the rest of the world. "Are you sure?" I asked, my voice hesitant. "I've lived here for years, and I've never seen that street before." She didn't respond immediately, instead watching me intently, as if weighing something inside her mind. Finally, she spoke again, her voice softer this time, almost a whisper. "It's the street you're looking for." I didn't understand what she meant. I didn't know what I was looking for. But there was something about the way she said it, something in the quiet certainty of her words that made me feel like I was standing at the edge of something, just a breath away from discovering the truth. I glanced down at the map in my phone, pulling it up absent-mindedly, just to confirm what I already knew, that Westbrook Avenue didn't exist. I scrolled through the map again, zooming in on the area where she had pointed. There was nothing there. No street. No sign, nothing. I looked up at her, about to speak, but she had already turned away. She wasn't looking at me anymore, her attention fixed on the street she had pointed to, the alley. She took a few slow steps forward, her figure growing smaller as she walked away. "Wait," I called out, my voice louder now, panic rising in my chest. "Where are you going?" She didn't turn back, but I saw her raise her hand, as though waving, or perhaps offering a final goodbye. The night air grew colder, and the shadows of the street seemed to stretch longer, darker. The world around me felt distant, disconnected, as though I had stepped out of one reality and into another. I took a step forward, unsure of why I felt so compelled to follow her. But before I could move any further, I stopped. Something was wrong. I wasn't sure what it was, but I felt it in my bones, an unsettling, suffocating feeling that made me hesitate. The alley ahead seemed to shift, the buildings looming closer, the shadows deepening. My feet felt heavier, my movements slower, as though I was being pulled towards something I couldn't understand. And yet, there she was, walking further away, her figure swallowed by the darkness. I stood there for a moment, watching her, then glanced back at my phone. I opened the map again, hoping to see something different, some kind of change. But when I zoomed in on the area, the street names were exactly as they had been. Nothing had changed. The alley still didn't exist. I turned back to the alley, and then without thinking, I stepped into it. The air inside felt thicker, colder, like stepping into an entirely different world. The further I walked, the quieter it became, until all I could hear was the sound of my own breath, quick and shallow. I couldn't see where the alley ended, the path ahead swallowed by the dark, but I kept walking, drawn forward by the strange pull that had taken hold of me. I was looking for something, but I didn't know what. And then, just as I turned the next corner, I saw it. A street sign. It was battered, old, but clear. Westbrook Avenue. I blinked, my mind struggling to comprehend what I was seeing. Westbrook Avenue wasn't on any map, yet here it was, hanging in front of me. The street stretched out before me, the road narrow and lined with trees that towered overhead, their branches intertwined, casting long, twisted shadows. I looked around, but the world felt wrong. The buildings were not what I expected. Old, decaying houses lined the street, their windows dark and empty. The streetlights flickered, casting an eerie, yellow glow across the path. The air was thick, heavy with an unspoken history, like the street had been waiting for me to find it. I glanced behind me, but there was no one. The alley was gone. There was nothing but the street, Westbrook Avenue, stretching out ahead. I felt a chill creep up my spine as I realized that no one else was here. No sounds, no movement. It was as if I had stepped into a place that existed outside of time, a place that wasn't meant to be found. I stood there, trying to make sense of it all. How had I gotten here? Why had I followed her, this woman who had pointed me toward a street that didn't exist on any map? I couldn't answer that, but one thing was certain: I wasn't alone here. There were others, too. Figures in the shadows, just beyond my line of sight. Watching me. I didn't look back. The street stretched ahead, and somewhere, in the distance, I could hear footsteps. Slow, deliberate, coming closer. But when I turned around, there was no one behind me. Only the street and the feeling that I had crossed into a place that should not have been. Westbrook Avenue. A street that wasn't supposed to exist. And now, neither was I. It started as a regular evening. The kind of evening where the mundane routines of the day slowly begin to fade, and the promise of quiet moments ahead settles in. I had returned from work, the day's weight still heavy in my bones, and I was looking forward to a few hours of solitude in my apartment. I didn't expect much, just the usual hum of the city outside, the soft flicker of the streetlights filtering through my window, and the comforting sound of my own breath. But something about that evening felt different, though I couldn't place it at first. As I wandered around my apartment, I noticed the silence was deeper than usual, almost like the air itself was holding its breath. There was an emptiness to the space that didn't belong. I thought it was just me, perhaps the fatigue from the day making everything feel more distant. But the unease kept gnawing at me, tugging at the edges of my thoughts. I decided to take a walk, a short one, just to clear my head. I stepped out onto the familiar streets, the cool air nipping at my face as I walked through the quiet neighborhood. The world seemed distant, muted somehow, and the shadows from the street lamps stretched unnaturally long, like they were reaching for something or someone. As I walked, my mind wandered, my feet moving automatically. I wasn't really paying attention to where I was going, just letting the rhythm of the walk soothe me. I turned the corner of my block and found myself in front of a house I hadn't thought about in years. It was the house I had grown up in, the one I had left behind long ago. The old brick facade, the faded blue shutters, the overgrown garden that had once been full of my mother's flowers. Everything about it was exactly how I remembered. But there was something wrong. I don't know why I did it, but before I could think, I found myself walking up the driveway, my steps slow and deliberate. The house looked empty from the outside, the curtains drawn, the lights off, the familiar signs of abandonment. I hadn't been here in so long, but the memories surged up as soon as I stepped onto the porch. The creak of the wooden steps beneath my feet, the sound of the wind whispering through the trees, everything felt both unfamiliar and hauntingly familiar at the same time. I reached for the door, my fingers brushing the cold brass handle. It didn't seem right. I hesitated, but something pushed me forward. I turned the handle, and the door opened easily, as though it had never been locked. Inside, it was quiet. Too quiet. The air was thick with dust, and the smell was stale, like something had been forgotten for a long time. The hallway stretched out before me, the wallpaper peeling slightly, the familiar sounds of the house absent. I stepped in, the floorboards creaking under my weight as I made my way deeper into the house. I knew this place, every inch of it. I had grown up here, spent years of my life in these rooms. And yet, as I walked through the hallway, everything felt wrong. The house seemed so much smaller now, as if the walls were closing in, the rooms shifting and rearranging themselves in ways I couldn't understand. The furniture was gone, replaced by shadows that seemed to stretch in unnatural directions. The house didn't feel like a home anymore. It felt like a memory, one that was fading, dissolving with every step I took. I moved instinctively, my feet carrying me toward the staircase. I could almost hear the echoes of my childhood, the laughter, the shouting, the soft hum of the radio playing in the kitchen. But now, it was all silent, swallowed by the emptiness. I reached the top of the stairs and turned toward the last door on the left, the door that had once led to my childhood bedroom. I paused for a moment, my hand hovering over the doorknob, as if waiting for something. I could feel my heart beating faster now, a strange sense of anticipation mixed with dread. I pushed the door open. It was my bedroom. Or at least, it should have been. The walls were bare, the familiar posters of bands and movie stars gone. The shelves that had once been filled with books and trinkets, now completely empty. The bed was still there, but it was covered in dust, the sheets yellowed with age. The window, which had once framed a view of the backyard where I'd spent hours playing, was now covered in grime, the curtains hanging limply from the rod. Everything was exactly as I remembered, but there was one glaring difference. It was empty. There was no trace of me in the room. No sign that I had ever lived there, ever existed in this place. The room was just an empty shell, a space where memories once lived, now stripped of everything that had made it mine. The walls, once filled with the remnants of my life, now stood cold and bare. I stood there for what felt like hours, just staring at the emptiness. The room felt distant, like it belonged to someone else. It wasn't the room I had grown up in, the one where I had laughed, cried, and dreamed. It was just a room, a hollow space caught in time. I turned to leave, but as I reached for the doorknob, something caught my eye. It was a small object on the floor near the window, half hidden in the shadows. I bent down to pick it up, my heart racing. When I saw what it was, I froze. It was an old photograph, the edges frayed with age. I turned it over slowly, my fingers trembling. It was a picture of me, at least, I thought it was. It was a younger version of myself, standing in front of the same bedroom door, smiling, carefree, but there was something wrong about the photo. My face was blurry, like it had been smudged, distorted in a way I couldn't explain. And the more I looked at it, the more it felt like it wasn't me at all. It felt like a ghost, a reflection of someone who had never really been there. I stood up quickly, my mind spinning. I had to leave. The house, the room, the photo, they all felt wrong, like pieces of a puzzle that didn't fit. I stepped back toward the door, my heart pounding, but as I turned to leave, I noticed something else. The door, it wasn't the same. It had changed. The familiar wood was now chipped and cracked, the doorknob tarnished, the hinges rusted. It was as though the room had aged before my eyes, as if time had caught up with me in the few moments I had spent there. I reached for the door again, but when I opened it, I found myself back in the hallway, standing in front of the staircase. The house had changed again. The layout, the walls, the rooms, it was all different now. The stairs were steeper, the hallway longer, and the rooms had shifted, contorted into something unrecognizable. I was trapped, lost in a place that was both familiar and foreign. I turned to look back at the door to my childhood bedroom, but when I did, it was gone. In its place was just another wall, plain and unmarked. There was nothing left of the room I had once known, nothing left of the memories I thought I could return to. The house had swallowed them whole, and as I stood there, I realized that I had never really left. The room, the house, the memories, they were all still here, waiting for me to come back, waiting for me to face the emptiness I had left behind. It was a typical Monday morning, the kind of day that feels both like a fresh start and a continuation of everything that has already been. I left my apartment, stepping into the quiet street, the city still wrapped in the early morning haze. The air was cool, crisp, the sky a muted shade of blue, as the first light of day kissed the edges of the buildings. The streets were emptier than usual, the kind of morning when the world hasn't yet fully woken up. I liked it that way, peaceful, without the rush of traffic or crowds. I walked down the same street I always did, passing the usual landmarks, the coffee shop with the crooked sign, the old bookstore with its dusty windows, and the small park where the elderly man always sat on the same bench, reading the paper. The city was familiar, predictable even, and for a moment, everything felt right in the world. But then, something shifted. Something subtle, almost imperceptible, that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I turned the corner onto another street, my steps steady, and that's when I saw her. At first I thought it was just a trick of the light. A woman standing on the sidewalk, looking down at the ground, her back to me. But there was something strange about her, something I couldn't quite place. She was dressed in an old-fashioned coat, the kind people wore decades ago, with long sleeves and a high collar. Her posture was stiff, almost unnaturally so, and her face, when I glimpsed it, was pale, too pale. Her eyes were wide open, staring at the ground, but there was no movement, no sign of life. I stopped, not sure what I was seeing. I didn't recognize her, but something about the way she stood there, so still, felt wrong. I glanced around to see if anyone else had noticed, but the street was empty, save for the usual city noise. The hum of distant traffic, the rustle of leaves in the wind. It was as though she didn't belong in this world, as if she had been placed there by mistake. I shook my head and kept walking, trying to dismiss the feeling creeping up my spine. I told myself it was nothing, that I was just tired, that I had imagined it. But as I walked further down the street, I saw someone else. A man, standing at the corner near the newsstand, but he didn't belong either. His clothes were out of place, as if he had stepped out of another time. A long overcoat, a bowler hat perched on his head, his expression unreadable. He was watching me, his gaze cold and distant, and when our eyes met, I felt a sudden, unsettling chill. I kept walking, my pace quickening, but it wasn't just the man that bothered me, was the way he looked at me. As if he knew something I didn't. It was as if he was aware of my presence in a way that felt too intimate, too real, and yet I didn't know him. He wasn't someone I had ever seen before, not in this city, not in my life. I rounded the corner and found myself in front of the small park where the elderly man always sat. But today, there was someone else there, sitting on the same bench. A woman, with dark, flowing hair, wearing a dress that looked far too elegant for this time of day. She was reading a book, her fingers delicately turning the pages, but her eyes were never on the text. She was staring at me, her gaze piercing through the space between us, like she had been waiting for me all along. I froze, my feet rooted to the pavement. My heart began to race. The woman in the park, she wasn't someone I had seen before either. I would have remembered her. And yet, here she was, seated as if she had always been there. I couldn't explain it, but the feeling of something wrong, something out of place, was growing stronger, suffocating. I looked around again, but the park was still empty, aside from the woman on the bench. There was no sign of the elderly man who usually sat there, the one who would always nod in greeting when I passed by. But the woman, she was still there, watching me with that unnerving intensity. I took a step back, my legs suddenly weak, my breath shallow. I felt a sense of panic rise within me. Something was wrong with the city, with the world around me, the familiar streets. The faces I had seen 1,000 times now felt distorted, unfamiliar. It was as though the people I had always known had vanished, replaced by strangers who shouldn't be here, who didn't belong. I turned away from the park, walking faster now, my mind reeling with confusion. But the deeper I walked into the city, the more I saw them. Everywhere I looked, there was someone new, someone who didn't belong. A woman in a 1940s dress standing at the bus stop, staring at the pavement. A man with a thick beard and a tattered coat standing on the sidewalk, his eyes locked on me as I passed. Another figure, this time a child, wearing old-fashioned clothing, standing motionless at the edge of the street. The city, the people, the places I thought I knew, they were all wrong now. The faces that should have been familiar, the sounds of the world that I had come to trust, were now distorted, unrecognizably. I couldn't make sense of it. I couldn't explain it. I reached the corner of my block and stopped, my chest tight with fear. I didn't want to go home, not yet. Not with the strange figures still lingering in my mind, still standing in the streets, watching me. But when I glanced up at the building across the street, something stopped me. The windows, there was something wrong with the windows. At first, I couldn't figure out what was odd. But then I saw it. Behind the glass, in the reflection, there was a figure standing in the window. A man, tall, dressed in a dark suit, his face obscured by shadows. His presence was familiar, but I couldn't remember why. I couldn't place him, not at first. And then it hit me. It was me. My own reflection was standing in the window, but I wasn't standing there. I was standing in the street, just across from it, staring at the window where I shouldn't have been. My heart stopped. I blinked, and in that split second, the figure in the reflection disappeared. Just like that, gone. I took a step back, then another, my mind spinning. I turned, looking around at the faces on the street. They were all strangers now, people who shouldn't have been there, people who didn't belong. The city had changed, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was the one who didn't fit. That somehow, I was the one who had slipped out of place. The city looked the same. The buildings, the streets, the signs, they were all where they should be. But the people I saw, the ones who shouldn't have been there, were waiting. Waiting for something, waiting for me. And the longer I stayed, the more I realized the truth. The city wasn't unfamiliar at all. It was me who had changed, and I didn't know how to leave. I don't remember exactly when I first saw her. It was one of those moments when time seems to stretch and collapse all at once, and the world feels like it's holding its breath. I was walking home after a long day, the streets familiar and routine, the world busy but indifferent to my presence. The sun was dipping low in the sky, casting long shadows across the pavement. And the buzz of city life was in full swing, the honking of horns, the chatter of people rushing past, the distant whir of bicycles, the kind of evening where the city seems like it's vibrating with its own pulse. As I approached the crosswalk near the corner of my street, I noticed her standing there. She wasn't standing in an urgent way. No hurry in her posture, just waiting. Her silhouette was framed by the dimming light, her long coat flowing gently in the wind. She was staring straight ahead, her face a little obscured by her hair, which was loose, catching the last rays of the day's sun. There was something about the way she stood, something familiar in the way her body language felt like it belonged there. The traffic light above shifted from green to yellow, then to red, signaling pedestrians to cross. I didn't think much of it, just another person waiting for the light to change. I stopped for a moment, unsure whether I should cross now or wait for the next light, but as I glanced at her, I noticed something odd. She wasn't just standing there, she was looking at me now. Her eyes weren't wide, but there was a depth to her gaze, something I couldn't quite place. It wasn't the look of someone waiting for the light to change. It was a look that seemed to say, I've been waiting for you. My pulse quickened, but I brushed it off as an odd coincidence. I took a few more steps forward, now closer to her, but still, I wasn't sure if I should speak to her. I opened my mouth, ready to offer a polite smile, maybe an awkward nod, but before I could get the words out, the light changed. The light turned green, and people started to move. I looked at her once more as I began to walk, but in that split second between looking away and then back again, she was gone. She had vanished. It wasn't like she had just walked away or crossed the street. It was more like she had never been there at all. The place where she had stood was empty now. The space between the curb and the crosswalk where she had waited, now utterly vacant. I stopped in my tracks, my feet rooted to the sidewalk. I had only blinked for a moment, but when I opened my eyes again, she was gone. I told myself it was nothing, just a trick of the evening light, maybe someone moving swiftly out of view. But something about it didn't sit right. The way she had been there, waiting so patiently, and then, nothing. It felt wrong, like I was missing something important. I glanced around, trying to see if she had somehow merged into the crowd, maybe walked ahead of me without me noticing. But no, the street was busy, sure, but no one matched her. No one moved with the same deliberate calm she had. It was like she had never existed at all. I hesitated at the crosswalk, the light still green for the cars, as I stood there, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Maybe it was just fatigue, I thought. Maybe my mind was playing tricks on me. I kept walking, trying to shake off the strange feeling creeping up my spine, but the unease stayed with me as I crossed the street. For the rest of the evening, I couldn't stop thinking about her. I kept replaying the moment in my head, wondering if I had imagined the whole thing, but I knew I hadn't. I could still see her in my mind, standing there, waiting for the light to change. The way she looked at me, almost knowingly, like she had been waiting for me. And that's what disturbed me the most, that feeling of recognition. I tried to put it out of my mind. I had a life to live, a routine to get back to. But as the days passed, something strange began to happen. Every time I crossed that same street, I couldn't help but glance at the crosswalk where she had stood. It was always empty. But I started noticing something else. Each time the light changed, I felt her presence again. Just for a moment, just a flash of something familiar at the corner of my eye. And it was always there waiting, just out of reach. One evening, a few weeks later, I found myself walking that same street again. The familiar rhythm of my footsteps guiding me. The sky was dark now, the streetlights casting long shadows on the sidewalk. As I neared the crosswalk, I felt it again, a sudden shift in the air. That same tension, that feeling that someone was waiting. I paused, my heart rate quickening as I glanced around, looking for any sign of her. And then, there she was, standing in the same spot. Her back turned to me, just like before, her coat flowing gently in the wind, her hair framing her face as she stared at the ground. But this time, I didn't hesitate. This time, I knew. I stepped forward, walking toward her, determined to close the gap, to speak to her. I couldn't let this feeling of being drawn to her continue. I had to know what was going on, why she felt so familiar, why she had been waiting for me. But when I reached the spot where she had been standing, the light changed, and she vanished, again. This time it wasn't just a disappearance, it was as if she had evaporated. There was no trace of her, no indication she had ever been there. The space where she had stood was just as empty as it had been before. I stood there, my heart hammering in my chest, staring at the spot where she had been. A strange calm washed over me, and in that moment, I knew something fundamental had shifted. I had been waiting for her, too, without even realizing it. But she wasn't just waiting at the crosswalk. She had been waiting in my life, waiting for me to understand something that I couldn't yet comprehend. She had appeared to me, just like she had disappeared, silent, fleeting, leaving only a faint echo behind her. And I realized then, with a sinking certainty, that she would always be waiting for me. Not in the physical world, not in the real world, but somewhere between moments, between breaths, between the times when we blink and the world shifts. She had always been there, and she would be there again when the light changed. It was a normal Wednesday, the kind of day that feels like it could go on forever. The air was thick with the promise of a coming storm, the clouds pressing down on the city, making everything look a little too gray. I had just finished a meeting and was walking through the neighborhood, tired from the monotony of my daily routine. The streets were emptier than usual, the sky darkening as people rushed to finish their errands before the rain hit. That's when I saw it. A building I had never noticed before, despite having walked this street countless times. It was tucked between two much older buildings, its architecture modern and sleek, standing out like a sore thumb. Its glass facade gleamed in the dimming light, but there was something about it that felt off. Not in an obvious way, but in a quiet, unsettling way that made me pause. I couldn't shake the feeling that it had always been there, watching me, waiting for me. The doors to the building were wide open, as if inviting me in. I hesitated for a moment, my instincts telling me to keep walking, to avoid whatever strange allure this place held. But curiosity won out, and I found myself stepping inside. The lobby was pristine, almost too clean. It smelled faintly of fresh paint and something floral, an artificial scent, too perfect to be real. The floors were polished marble, the walls smooth and unblemished, and the light above, though bright, was strangely comforting. It was the kind of space you would expect to find in a luxury hotel or an office building, but it felt off. It felt too perfect, too curated. There was no receptionist at the front desk, no sounds of footsteps or voices. The silence was overwhelming, like the building itself was holding its breath. I glanced around, wondering if I had somehow stumbled into a private space or if it was open to the public. But there were no signs, no direction, no indication of what the building was used for. I walked further into the lobby, my footsteps echoing louder than I expected on the smooth floor. As I reached the middle of the room, I turned back to the door, intending to leave. But that's when I noticed something strange. The lights, they weren't just in the lobby. They extended down a long hallway to the left and right, their soft, fluorescent glow spilling into every corner. The hallways stretched out in both directions, empty, but the lights were on. All of them. Even the ones at the far end, well beyond where I stood. I couldn't explain why, but the sight of those lights, so bright and yet eerily still, unsettled me. The building was so quiet, so devoid of life, and yet the lights were on, as if someone had been there moments before. Or perhaps, someone was still there. The feeling of being watched crept up my spine, but when I turned to leave, I noticed something even stranger. The door was closed. I hadn't heard it shut, hadn't felt the change in air, but it was unmistakable. The large glass door, which had been wide open when I entered, was now shut, sealed tight. I walked toward it, the soft hum of the lights echoing in my ears, and tried the handle. It didn't budge. I pulled harder, but it stayed locked. I felt the cold twist of panic settle in my stomach. I stepped back, trying to gather my thoughts, but the lobby was still quiet and suffocating. The air felt heavier now, thicker, as though the building itself was alive, watching me. I couldn't quite place it, but I had the overwhelming sense that something wasn't right. I turned toward the hallway again, the one that stretched out in both directions, and took a step deeper into the building. The lights beckoned me forward, their soft glow seeming to pulse with a rhythm of their own, like the building itself was calling to me, pulling me deeper into its core. It was then that I noticed another detail that sent a shiver down my spine. The hallway seemed to extend farther than it should have. I had passed through this lobby just moments before, but now, the hallway appeared to stretch further into the distance, the lights becoming smaller and dimmer, the shadows deeper. It was as if the building itself had changed, growing longer, larger, or maybe it was me, maybe I was the one shifting. I walked down the hallway, drawn by some invisible force, my steps now hesitant but determined. The further I walked, the more the building felt like it was shifting around me, the walls growing narrower, the light becoming more intense, almost blinding. And then, when I reached the end of the hall, I saw it. A small door, tucked away in the corner, almost hidden. It wasn't like the sleek, modern design of the rest of the building. It was old, weathered, its edges chipped and worn. It stood in stark contrast to the pristine lobby I had first entered. I approached it cautiously, the feeling of dread rising in my chest. I reached for the handle, but before I could touch it, the lights flickered. The entire building seemed to tremble, and I could hear the faint hum of machinery in the walls. The door creaked open, and a gust of cold air rushed toward me, a wave of ice-cold breath that made me shiver. Beyond the door was darkness. Not the kind of darkness you expect from a room without light, but an oppressive, suffocating kind of dark, as if the space beyond the door was a void, a place that shouldn't exist. I stepped back, my heart racing. I was suddenly overwhelmed with the need to leave, to get out of the building. I turned around, but when I looked back toward the lobby, I saw something that made my blood run cold. The lights were still on, but this time they were different. They were brighter, harsher, like they had intensified in my absence. And when I looked at the glass door, it was open again, wide open, as if the building was offering me an escape. I didn't question it. I ran. I didn't look back as I sprinted down the hallway toward the door. The lights seemed to flicker out of sync with my steps, their rhythm growing erratic. When I reached the lobby, the door was still open, and without a second thought, I bolted through it. But as I stepped onto the street, I glanced back, breathing heavily, expecting to see the building, to see the lights still on, still shining brightly in the dim evening air. But when I looked, there was nothing. The building was gone. The streets were empty, the spot where the building had stood now just a stretch of empty sidewalk. I turned quickly, my heart pounding in my chest, but when I looked again, the building was back, its lights shining as brightly as ever. I stared at it for a long moment, unsure of what I was seeing, but the door remained open, inviting me in, waiting. I turned away and walked faster, the sound of my footsteps loud against the quiet street. I didn't look back again, but every time I closed my eyes, I could still see the lights burning in that empty building, always on, even when I left.